Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now! So honored to be joining you here at the Maysles Documentary Center, and especially honored to be speaking to Bob Elfstrom, the director of the film you're about to see, Pete Seeger, A Song and a Stone. But first, a little background on Bob. Back in the 60s, he began making his own films, came to be known as an extraordinarily skilled camera person. He fell in with D.A. Pennebaker, the Maysles brothers, and others in the American cinema verite movement. Bob's earned awards as director of photography, but also for countless productions he's worked on over his half-a-century-long career, including being one of the main cinematographers for the Maysles, Gimme Shelter, and Shirley Clark's Ornette, Made in America. But we're going to talk tonight about Pete Seeger, A Song and a Stone. Made at a time when Pete was blacklisted from many mainstream media outlets, the film combines concert footage, anti-war demonstrations, conversations with families and friends, and you get to see, yep, Pete Seeger in the studios of WBAI. Bob, what an honor it is to be with you. I want you to spend this few minutes we have before the film to talk about making it 50 years ago, 1971, why you chose to focus on Pete, and what his story means for us today, 50 years later.
Yeah, I would say that that the story started probably in Vietnam. I had been in Vietnam as a cameraman on the end of '67, and coming back from that period, I felt knotted up inside, choked up with confusion and questions. And one of my places to go to was to listen to Pete Seeger music. And the opportunity came when the Swedish television gave me a small sum of money to make a film, not saying what that film had to be. The Swedish television is where I got my start in 1960. I was with them for 5 years, and it was the greatest break of my life. And I could spend 5 years making mistakes in order to learn my craft.
What's also interesting is the parallels to today. I mean, you're talking to a blacklisted man, right? Pete Seeger. You're talking to a guy who, he performs in the film, but you have the footage of it, waist deep in the Big Muddy. Not on the Smothers Brothers, where it was axed for a while. But talk about that.
Well, I had made a film with Johnny Cash back in '67, '68. And at that time, we had spoken about Pete Seeger. And that was not going well on television. He was blacklisted. It was bad. When I started the film with Pete, and I spent several months with him, I found a haven for the confusion that I was suffering with. So I just decided to hang in there with him and follow his life. And I spent week after week being with him. And as the footage started accumulating, I had the good fortune to get a film editor by the name of John Craddock to cut on the film, and he started making sense out of it. And what I very quickly noticed over a period of time, that the Pete Seeger that I had recognized on all of his records, that he was going through a transition. And I saw in him an anger, severe anger that was building and building. And it kind of confused me, because in his presence, I knew that I was in the company of, I guess you could call a prophet. He was a prophet to me. And when I went around with him, he was with me, but then he wasn't with me. His mind always seemed to be in deep thought. I mean, he could function because Toshi was there to guide him through normal life. But his mind and his heart was somewhere else. And I became fascinated by that. And it drew me in closer and closer. It's not that we became great friends and buddies and things of that sort. I tried to keep a bit of a distance. I wanted to have a perspective on him, and I wanted the film to be about Vietnam. And now, as it turns out, 50 years later, the film is almost fresh off of the shelf with what's happening in Gaza and Ukraine. And as I listen to the news bulletins that come in every day, my mind goes right to him, and I'm thinking, well, how would he respond on this? I think he would be horrified. He would be I think, at this point, in tears.
You know, Bob, I think about him saying in the film, "What can I sing? They won't let me sing about Vietnam." And you go back even decades. Before you go back, I remember interviewing Pete 10 years ago, talking about the Peekskill riot in 2000, in 1949, I think it was, right? Paul Robeson and the stoning and the violence that they were met with by the mobs.
Yeah, you probably know more about it than I do. He touched on it with me. I do know that they were in a vehicle together and they were actually stoned. Mm-hmm. And he was terrified. And I think more than that, he was shocked at that kind of rowdy behavior.
Well, Bob, since we only have a minute, because I'm going to interrupt you for showing your film, but as you're the director of Pete Seeger, A Song and a Stone, speaking of stones, talk about choosing that title.
Well, it was the shock to me. It was the concert at Brandeis. And at that point, when he stoops over, reaches down into his guitar case and takes out a rock, I didn't know this was going to happen. This was no rehearsal. It was his impulsive thing that he did. And when he picked up that rock and held it in his hand and said the words that he said, those words coming out of Pete Seeger, I was completely taken aback. And at that moment, I knew this was the end of the film. A transition had taken place in that year that I was with Pete. I knew what he was when he began that film, but on the end of the film, I think we can all say to ourselves, maybe there's something to be learned by that stone.
Well, Bob Elfstrom, that is a perfect introduction to your film about Pete Seeger. Bob is director of Pete Seeger, A Song and a Stone. And tomorrow you can see another film Bob directed, Johnny Cash, The Man, His World, His Music, and Behind the Lens. But right now, let's turn to the film, because I think that says or sings it all, Bob. And Bob, thank you so much for joining us from dear Isle, Maine. I wish I was there with you. Folks, now on to the show. Pete Seeger, A Song and a Stone.
Thank you.